Welcome to You Are Intuitive, a refreshing series of interviews that feature candid, intimate, and grounded conversations about developing and using intuition in the real world. I am your host, Dana Mahachek, and it is a true honor to have you here. Thank you so much for tuning in. My guest today is a writer, tarot reader, and one of the most down-to-earth spiritual mentors I've ever encountered. Carrie Mallon is an INFP with a Cancer sun sign and Virgo moon sign. She has a bachelor's degree in human development and is totally fascinated by the human psyche. Carrie enjoys cuddling with cats, thinking about the meaning of life, and encouraging others to become the most expansive version of themselves. She has created a stunningly comprehensive and insightful resource on the wild unknown tarot deck meanings, which you can access on her website, and she is also available for heart-affirming private readings as well as customized mentorship services. It was such a thrill to have the opportunity to speak with Carrie, and I hope that you enjoy hearing about her experiences and basking in her beautiful insights. Thank you again for tuning in. Hi, Carrie. I'm so excited to speak with you today. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Dana. Thank you as well. It's an honor. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
For sure. So one of the places that I like to start with these conversations is the most obvious and basic question, and that's whether you consider yourself to be intuitive.
I do consider myself to be intuitive, and I suppose I'm one of those people who thinks everyone is intuitive.
Me too. Have you always felt that way though? Like, have you always felt that you were intuitive or that you were somehow processing things that weren't necessarily tangible or logical or rational?
I don't think I always had the language for it.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until probably my mid-20s that I began to know how to articulate it. But I think, yeah, probably it's been in my sort of the way I look at the world my entire life. From the time I was a small kid, I was always really introspective, and I always kind of felt things. And I think I knew from a young age that some of the way that I processed things was different than maybe the way that some other people processed things.
Mm-hmm. And did you have any, like, as you were starting to develop the language and like understand a framework for like, oh, this is intuition, what was that journey like for you in your 20s as you started to, I guess, maybe label it as intuition and understand how to tap into it a little bit more? What was that like for you?
I think probably the most relevant thing to answer that question, I talk about this a lot, but in my 20s, I discovered the artist's way. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Okay. So, and that just clicked so many things into place for me. And in the artist's way, for anyone who's not familiar, it's a book by Julia Cameron, which is essentially a course that is designed to help you get unstuck creatively. And to me, my creativity and my intuition have always been very linked. So I think that's why it was so relevant.
Mm-hmm.
So in the artist's way, Julia Cameron described getting for herself what she called marching orders. And I remember reading that and thinking, I get marching orders too. And then as it progressed from there, as I began like learning more about tarot and everything else, I then had that terminology to think, oh, that's my intuition.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that where it first kind of clicked into place is when I heard someone else say, oh, I get these marching orders, was like, oh yeah, me too.
Me too. And for you personally, what do those marching orders look like or feel like? Like, how do you know that you're getting a marching order?
I think one thing that's really interesting about intuition that maybe is something some people have a misconception about. I think sometimes we have this idea that when you get some intuitive information, it comes in like this big spark and like the clouds part. And I think there is a time and a space where some of us have that experience, but usually for me, it's more subtle. It's just kind of, sometimes it's hard to even right away know that that's an intuitive hit that I'm getting because it just sort of arises really naturally and it's just a thought. For me, it's often a thought telling me perhaps you should do this or say this or go there, and it just feels, usually for me it feels pretty subtle. It doesn't feel like, oh, here's my intuition.
The cymbals crashing and the trumpets are announcing the arrival of your intuition.
I have those moments sometimes, but in my daily life it's usually much more just like very mellow, and I think maybe that's why some people think they're not intuitive, because they don't know that these things that seem really subtle, they are your intuition.
Yeah, and it is that your experience reflects mine a lot in terms of these misperceptions too, that I was expecting more fanfare and like a neon sign, like something so obvious and so extraordinary, and then realizing that, oh, actually these like really everyday, ordinary, commonplace feelings and thoughts that I'm having, that's intuition too, but it's actually like the bulk of intuition. It's like 99% of what my intuition is these really basic things that it took me actually developing a practice of like pointing to those subtle instances and those like basic occurrences and actually labeling it like, this is intuition, this is intuition, this is intuition, before I realized, hey, I'm actually pretty intuitive.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, sorry, my cat decided to come up in my lap. I was like, you're gonna sit there and distract me the whole time if I don't just let you go.
That's all good. I love seeing your cats on Instagram.
Yeah, they're sweethearts.
Yeah. Did you have when again you were kind of coming into your intuition and kind of owning that and claiming that, were the people around you supportive, or was it an issue or a big deal at all in terms of maybe your partner or your family or your friends?
I think that I did a lot of projecting when it was especially when it was the phase where I was really getting into tarot and getting ready to start my business. I think I had a lot of fear around how other people would react to it. And in hindsight, I can see that that was based on my stuff, not other people's genuine reactions. So I think I think that's another really important thing for people to just know as well, is that when we start to come into our intuitive gifts, the way that other people in our lives respond to that, I really, really feel is so strongly influenced by the energy we bring to it. If we come to our partners or our friends and say, oh my gosh, I know this is so weird, but I have this intuition. I know it's weird. Like, don't think I'm crazy. If we kind of come at it like that, people pick up on that. So I think it's really important at least it was for me, to kind of get right with it for myself, which took a while. There was a long time of like being very secretive and having this whole inner world that like my close friends and things didn't even really know that much what was going on in my inner world. And I had to kind of get right with that for myself first before I could present it in a meaningful way to the people in my life. I don't know if I even answered your question. I feel like I started rambling.
No, this is perfect actually, and I want to pick up on that a little bit more. In terms of the projections and like not feeling fully aligned with it or not feeling fully cool with it, what were some of the specific fears that you maybe had around people knowing that you were intuitive now?
I think a big one for me is that I am a very intuitive person, but I also really value logic and
Mm-hmm.
rationality and reason. So I think that some of the projections that I had were rooted in this idea that if I am an intuitive person, I am not a rational person.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of hangups about that. And it's still a process for me. And that's been, I think, one of my biggest lessons that I've needed to integrate. And I'm always still deepening it, is that there's room for both. They're both valid ways of processing information.
Mm-hmm. And not only is there room for both, I'm finding that both are necessary. Like if I was to only be intuitive, and the times in my life where I do kind of let myself go, I was going to say down this rabbit hole, but it feels like up into space with it, just like supremely mystical. That feels fun and okay for a while, but then it's like, actually, I kind of need some logic here. I need some like something more tangible and something more grounded to like bring me back down
Yeah.
to earth.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's I know I don't know a lot about astrology, but I know one thing you and I have in common is we have a Cancer sun sign,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I don't know a lot about it, but as I've started learning a tiny bit, I looked at my chart and I realized, so my sun sign is Cancer and my moon sign is Virgo.
Okay, yeah.
Like, what? Virgo? That doesn't make sense. And the more that I've thought about it, I've realized Virgo is very grounded and about order and like sense. So maybe that's where some of that stems for me, that there's this part of me that still wants to value like structure and logic and all of that.
Mm-hmm. And for me, I don't have really any Virgo in my chart, but I have a lot of Gemini, and the Gemini is like feeling and thinking, logic and intuition. Um, so I get to be all over the map with that, which is really, really fun. Were there some other fears that you had around, I guess, coming out as an intuitive, or was it primarily that just that belief that you could be either intuitive or intelligent, rational, logical, grounded?
I think that was probably the biggest one. There were maybe some other fears. Well, I know there were some other fears. I might just be having a hard time thinking of them right now, but I guess one that comes to mind on a slightly different note is just the fear of, is this intuitive information that I'm receiving actually valid?
Mm.
And I think that's been really useful for me to think about, actually, because I don't think that my intuition is always 100% on point. And I think it's been really important for me to acknowledge that I don't kind of get into this ego space of like, I'm intuitive and I can always know what's going on because I'm intuitive. So yeah, maybe that was a fear as well. It's just like wanting to make sure that I don't become somebody who thinks like I have all the answers because I'm intuitive.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny that you bring that up as like a fear, because it can also be a hope in some way, that like you kind of hope that being intuitive means that you have the answers. So like on one hand, yeah, you don't want to come at it from this like egoic, and also like I'm better than people who don't have intuition. You obviously don't want to come across it from that perspective. But I found for me, there was, even though I knew it wasn't the case, like I kind of secretly hoped that like if I just connect with my intuition more and if I deepen my intuitive practice, I will get to this point where I do know all the answers.
Yeah, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I think that has to be something inherent in human nature, that we want to have all of the answers. And that's been another really powerful lesson for me, is realizing that I think often how my intuition works is I will get a small, tiny step. I will get the next right move. And what my ego wants is like, I want to know all the answers. I want to know everything. What should I do? How should I go? What's going to happen? And instead, I get kind of like I almost think of it as the hermit card in tarot, how he
Yeah.
has the lamp and he can kind of use that inner knowing to illuminate his next step, but that's not always lighting up the entire path. There's still, we still have to learn and we still have to kind of let things unfold as we move through them.
Mm-hmm. And having that next right step or that next right action, how has that unfolded now in your life? Like, I know that you used to work a regular job and then decided to start an intuitive business. What was that like? Like, did you get a big flashy insight with it, or was it just one little breadcrumb after another? What was that process like?
It's interesting you ask that because I think that phase in my life was one example of a time where the intuition was much more dramatic. I talked earlier about it normally being subtle. That was my Saturn return. Again, not knowing a lot about astrology, but I was going through this phase where everything was changing. I was questioning who I was, what I wanted to do. Like all of these things were just boiling up within me and within the stars and everything. And it was, yeah, it kind of just, I guess it did come over time. It wasn't necessarily one burst, but it was an intense boiling over a sort of short period of time. I was drawing the death card a lot during that time, and part of me didn't want to listen to that like breakthrough that I was reaching. Part of me was like, no, I can't quit my job. I can't do something so outlandish. I have to be reasonable. But it reached sort of this peak where it was just sort of like, Carrie, this is what you have to do, and the intuition was just like. So that was one example where it was more dramatic, I think, for me.
Mm-hmm. And then, because I've been following your journey on Instagram for, I think, maybe 2 years now.
Yeah.
But I know that, like, once you started your business, it's not like all of a sudden all the pieces fell into place. And even like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, even when you listen to your intuition and even when you have these really strong intuitions and you follow them, it still doesn't mean that like everything's smooth sailing for forever and ever more, right? And I know that you have made a lot of changes in your business over the years as you've been building it and developing it. What kind of pivots have you been inspired or guided to make in your business throughout the past few years since you started it?
Oh, there's been a lot. And yeah, I think that that's it. You kind of described that once we know something intuitively, it doesn't necessarily mean that following that knowledge is going to mean everything works out right away. And that's been another huge lesson for me is that I did follow that intuitive knowledge. And honestly, my ego had a humbling for quite a while there because it was like, well, I had this huge breakthrough and I knew this is what I needed to do and I did it and now it's so hard. And I was hoping like I'll just do it and everything will be great and my life will be perfect and I'll never, have like this inner turmoil again. But that isn't really how it's gone. It's been a continuous deepening for me. And the business has challenged me in various ways to keep discovering who I am and to accept that the process of living intuitively is a lifelong process. And sometimes there's been certain points in my business where it has involved making somewhat bigger changes. Like I rebranded, you probably know, I used to be Happy Fish Tarot, and then I rebranded probably was about 2 years ago, I think, I can't remember, but I rebranded to just use my name. So there's been a few things like that where it's been kind of scary and it's felt like a big shift, but I think the longer that I sort of roll with it, the more trust I feel that what my intuition leads me to do in my business, even if it doesn't lead me to what my ego wants, which is like success and all of these things, it will lead me to what I need. It will lead me to the lessons that are most important for me. So I've tried to just keep following what's coming up, which is sometimes easier said than done.
Like all the time, easier said than done.
It's definitely been an adventure to watch how things have gone with the business and with everything else.
Mm-hmm. And are you continually checking in intuitively for, I guess, insights or guidance on what your next steps are, business-wise and life-wise?
Yeah, I would say so. I try to anyway. I think one of the practices that I have that is most effective for that is journaling.
Mm-hmm.
I've been a journaler my entire life, and I've always kind of felt like there's these energies that I'm sensing, but sometimes they're so jumbled, and writing them out helps me sort through them, and it helps me kind of clear away some of the dust and the muck, and it helps me get more aligned with what the intuition is actually bringing forward. So that's something that I do almost every day, and it's like the most simple way that I continue to check in with what's going on intuitively.
Mm-hmm. And I know that you do have, I would call it a pretty strong tarot practice. I don't know how regularly you pull cards these days for yourself, I should say. You probably do them most days for clients, but for people who are maybe just starting out, um, can we speak about the tarot a bit, and just, is that something that you've always felt connected to, or able to understand and interpret?
I came a little late compared to some people to tarot, so I was in my mid 20s when I started working with the cards, and a lot of people have been since they were teenagers or whatnot. But when I did start working with tarot, I would say it was something that clicked with me pretty naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the reason that happened for me, and that it happens for a lot of people who come into tarot, is that the system and the deck as a whole mirrors these elements of the human experience that we're all somewhat familiar with. And people who naturally are perhaps more inclined to use their intuition, I think we're already more aware of those patterns that tarot kind of lays out. I think
Mm-hmm.
we all, even people that are more logically minded, we're all kind of plugged into those patterns. But if you naturally process things intuitively, I think when you start working with tarot, I should say for me anyway, when
Mm-hmm.
I started working with tarot, it just sort of it fell into place really well with kind of some patterns and things that I'd already noticed, if that makes
Mm-hmm. It does make sense. And I know, like, for me, I had been, like, I had a tarot deck since I was in my early 20s. Um, but I would never, like, I would pull a card and then it would be straight to the guidebook to, like, read what the message was or what the guidance was. And I always, for some reason at that point, I took it like at face value. And whatever it said, I remember there being a few times where I'd pull a card and I'd read the interpretation and then get freaked out that, like, oh no, this is like something bad is going to happen. Or sometimes I'd be excited that, like, oh, this says something really great is going to happen. And it wasn't literally until I was like 34 that I decided I'm going to start building my own relationship with tarot. And I'm just going to, like, I went on a guidebook diet and was like, I'm not allowed to look at this. And I want to see what meanings or what insights I can feel in these cards without having this, like, structure of, like, this is what it's supposed to mean, or like if it's reversed then it means this, and if it's in this position in this spread, this is like the official meaning. um do you find too that the way you have kind of deepened into your tarot practice, that it is more intuitively based, or do your interpretations of the cards still pretty closely mirror what the official meaning is?
I think that this is a conversation that comes up a lot in the tarot community, and I feel personally that there's no way tarot cannot be intuitive. even if you are adhering to a guidebook or meanings, they're structured in a way that you have to put some kind of intuitive value into what that meaning is in order to apply it to the situation or whatever you're reading for. So I am of the belief or opinion, I guess you could say, that it's always intuitive no matter how you do tarot. For me personally, I like to, or what I found works for me,
Mm-hmm.
is having a bit of both. Um, I think that if I didn't have some type of broader structure to apply to the cards, it would just feel like these 78 random cards just kind of floating around. It would feel
Mm-hmm.
more like an oracle deck, I guess. And I love
Yeah.
oracle decks. But tarot, I think the reason that for me tarot has such an appeal is that it does have some type of structure. I try not to impose so many specifics upon that structure that it like suffocates intuition. And
Mm-hmm.
there are times where I pull a card in a reading and all of that structure just falls away and it's something in the image where it's a feeling or it's something that comes up. So
Mm-hmm.
that does happen. But it's been really useful for me to I guess I can't remember who it was, like Picasso or someone that said, know all of the rules so that you can break all of the rules or
Yeah.
something like that. That's kind of how I feel about tarot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that really, because my partner is an artist, and the same rule. Well, obviously, an artist originally said the quote, so you do need to know the at least the basics, or at least the framework, before you can really stray from that or kind of tailor it and make it your own. I agree with that too.
I feel also that the best way that I think a framework is useful in tarot, at least for me, is that the framework that I use with tarot actually deepens my intuition, if that makes sense. If I have sort of a general framework of how the deck is structured and what groups of cards speak to different themes,
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of like instead of me looking at them again and feeling like they're just all these disparate images, I feel like, oh, cups are about feelings and I can connect with what feelings are and what that is. And oh, swords are about thoughts. And I can sort of understand that framework. And then it gives me actually, it's sort of like a paradox where having that structure and that logic to it actually makes my intuition stronger and it makes my intuition more efficient, I feel.
Mm-hmm. With, I want to kind of circle back a little bit into just talking about business, because I know that a lot of people, especially now, who are kind of waking up to the fact that they are intuitive, there are a lot of people who are wanting to find ways to infuse their intuition into a business or into some kind of offerings or some kind of services. Do you have any, I guess, specific practices or recommendations for people who are who have marching orders maybe to be intuitive in a professional capacity? Do you have practices or recommendations that people could maybe take as a first step or a jumping off point?
This is all just kind of coming from my perspective, so
Mm-hmm.
take it for a grain of salt, anyone who's listening. But I read the book Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. Have you read that one?
I have. It's awesome.
It's awesome, and it clicked so many things for me. I was like, oh yeah, oh yeah, and it was things that I think I was totally oblivious to when I started my business. So one thing she talks about in there is don't expect or don't impose upon your creative gifts that they need to pay your bills.
Yeah.
And I think that, at least for me, I consider my intuition to be a creative gift. And I have had some phases in my business where I have funked up the energy in my business because I'm like trying to whip my intuition and my creativity and say, make money. And that I would advise do not do that, because it will make your intuition and your creativity go into hiding. It will mess up the energy of what you're giving and receiving. So, and then the other thing I would say, I hope these don't sound like really discouraging. I would say Okay, I guess the core of what I'm saying with all of this is that it's hard. It's beautiful and it's wonderful. And if it is what you feel pulled in your soul to do, please do it. Please do it. But just know that just because this is kind of like what we talked about earlier, but for me, a huge lesson has been that just because I feel pulled to do something and I know it's what's right for me, that does not mean it's going to be easy. It does not mean that I'm going to make a ton of money overnight. It does not mean everything's going to go really well. It is still going to be a journey and a process. And if you are comfortable with that, and if you have the grit to show up for the beautiful stuff, which there's a lot of beautiful stuff with being self-employed and using your creativity and your intuition, it's a great gift in my life, and I'm incredibly grateful. But I think a lot of people go into it thinking like, oh, if it's meant to be, everything's just going to work out and it's going to flow all of the time. And that might be your experience, but it might not be your experience. So just, yeah, I would say if you feel it's what you want to do, go into it, but know that you need to take the struggles with the blessings and find the blessings in the struggles as well.
I love, love, love that you brought this up, because this is also something not only that I've personally experienced, but kind of witness in the, I guess, professionally intuitive soulpreneur kind of community. And that is this idea. I feel that there's a lot of shame built into, like, if you're not able to have 100% of your income derived from intuition, then that's like a bad thing, or maybe you're not very good at intuition, or maybe it feels like a failure or a less than if you can't make 100% of your income from intuition. Mm-hmm. There's also just so many expectations and comparison about what success looks like for intuition. There's like this, like an unspoken standard, or this undercurrent of, yeah, what success looks like a benchmark of success. And if you either don't reach that point, or you are like finding success in another way, it can feel awful. Like it can feel like somehow you're wrong, or that you've missed the mark, or that that there's a lot of shame and just awful feelings associated with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about this a lot, and I've personally struggled with this a lot, to be completely frank. Mm-hmm. Part of what I think happens is we, as an intuitive person, as a creative person, and as someone who for me, my business, it is a business, but it's also an expression of my soul. Mm-hmm. It's something I feel called to do. It's like very, very close to my personal self.
Yeah.
And so it can be really hard. And I think that's how a lot of us are as intuitive business owners. Our business is linked to our self-worth. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's necessarily a totally bad thing, because why else would we be doing it if it wasn't linked to fulfilling our soul and giving us a sense of worth? But it can get really dangerous when we feel like, if I'm not meeting whatever success standard, if I don't have this many followers or making this much money, then I'm not succeeding. Mm. When we tell ourselves that story, it's like it's stabbing a knife in our self-worth, and it's bad. And I really, sorry, I could ramble about this all day because I'm so passionate about this. But again, I don't want to discourage anyone from continuing or starting a business. If you feel called to it, follow that calling, but it is hard. And for some people, it might not ever pay all of your bills. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it will pay all of my bills forever. I don't know if I'll get a real job someday again. And we need to take away the shame around that, because it's hurting us. It's hurting souls. I talk to so many people where that's hurting their soul, that shame. And so we need to heal that.
Yeah, well, and I think that having this conversation, I'm so glad that this is the way it unfolded, because I am also really passionate about it. And I feel really strongly that I feel one of the barriers to kind of becoming intuitive, or at least using intuition in a professional capacity, is this like, is the idea and the expectation of like, if I'm going to put myself out there, I have to like jump to the top of this mountain of success, right? And if I don't reach that, like, what am I doing, or why am I even bothering? And I find, especially in the online world, that there's this like a need or an expectation to present yourself as like, I'm super intuitive and I pay all my bills with this, right? Like, I'm on a laptop in Bali, and you can be
Yeah.
this way too if you're as magical and intuitive as I am.
Yeah. Well, I don't want this to sound like I'm trying to be low vibe or anything like that, but there is a reason for that. And it is that there is money to be made. There's this whole thing in the spiritual business industry of people who make their living by teaching you how to make your living starting a spiritual business. And I think we need to be kind of critical of that, not in a judgmental way, but I think that each of us as spiritual entrepreneurs need to be aware of the energy that people are putting out there, because there there is an ability with the internet for people to portray a certain lifestyle, portray certain truths about themselves in a way that I think is dangerous, because it preys upon the vulnerability of the shame that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, yeah. And again, for people who are like on the fence and are like, I feel this urge, or I feel this calling to do that, but I'm scared and I'm like worried about reaching this benchmark. I love that you brought up that the Big Magic book too, about like, it's okay. And it actually might be kind of beneficial if, at least at the beginning, you're not like leaping off and requiring your intuition to like save you and pay all of your bills. So having like the bridge job, or having the still full-time job while you like start off offering intuitive services, I think that that's actually pretty wise and pretty smart, so that you're not requiring something. Because for me, like, my intuition feels really, really sacred to me, and it almost feels abusive to require something so sacred to be all the things, and to like check all the boxes off, where I can do other things to have that baseline standard safety, bills paid, roof over my head. I can do other things and not require my intuition to do that for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't even know what the question is with there, but I'm just like
No, I completely, I feel the same way. And I think on that note, it's also worth mentioning that some people do not ever feel the pulling to take their intuition in the direction of a business. And I think um, there can be some idea in this online space we hang out in that if you are an intuitive person, it's just almost like an assumption that you're going to try to monetize that. And some people, they don't feel that calling. They are satisfied with the work that they're doing, or they feel called to pursue other ways to gain monetary things, and to use their intuition as more of a just like this creatively fulfilling hobby. Or hobby is kind of not the word I'm looking for, but you know what I
no.
mean? I think
Yeah.
that's important as well, to just let people know you don't have to make a business. You don't have to do it. I know it's what everyone's doing, but you don't have to do it.
And then how do you personally check in with yourself to see what's in alignment for you, or what is right for you? What does that practice look like for you?
One of the things that I think is the most readily available for me is just checking in with my internal state. And I don't know how to explain that maybe without sounding vague and ethereal, but it is kind of a vague and ethereal thing. I think the more that I have practiced tuning into my internal energy, the more I can tell, am I, a lot of it's physical. You know, it's things like, how's my body posture? Am I
Mm-hmm.
feeling relaxed? Am I feeling like, are my shoulders all tense? Am I getting, which I've done a few times in our conversation because I've gotten passionate about things. And there's a room and a space to have that energy. But if I'm trying to really be with my intuition, I need to be breathing. Things need to
Mm-hmm.
be softer. And so I try to first check into that energy, what's going on internally. If something is coming up for me that feels frantic or feels fear based, it is usually not my intuition, it's something
Mm-hmm.
else. So if it feels natural and somewhat soft and open. I don't even know how to describe it. It's just kind of a feeling. And I think that I've gotten used to checking in with that feeling the more that I've tried to align with my intuition.
Mm-hmm. And I find personally for me when I'm checking in, I think it was Martha Beck who described kind of the two main feelings as either shackles on or shackles off. And things that are in alignment with you and that resonate and that are beneficial to you feel more like freedom and feel more like expansion and almost like just like a sigh of relief, shackles off. And
Yeah.
then anytime when you're tuning in to your physical body or to your emotions or just your energetic state, and it feels like hustling or proving or striving or rushing, like you said, um, scarcity, like just a fear of missing out. All of that kind of is like that might not be in your best interests or you can go that way, but it's going to feel like an uphill battle the whole time. Like if you already have your shackles on, step one, it might be a bit more of a struggle to go down that path. So if people are, I guess, coming to that, if they're in the position where they're like, do I monetize this or do I like actually make a business out of it? I love the suggestion of just like checking in with yourself and seeing like, does it feel good? Does it feel open? Does it feel exciting? Like it might still feel scary, probably, but if there is more of that edge of like excitement and thrill and a possibility for expansion, then that's something that people can choose or not to follow.
Yeah. I
Mm-hmm.
think I do some business mentoring, and another thing that I find myself often telling people who are either just thinking about starting a business or trying to decide if they even want to start a business is to give yourself permission to just experiment, because when you're a creative person, at least for me and a lot of the people I work with, and you get an idea of something you want to do, it's
Mm-hmm.
easy to jump like 500 paces ahead of yourself, and you're envisioning like this beautiful perfect website and like your stunning home office, and it's like, wait, first you need to just like take a deep breath and do, maybe like just start a WordPress site for free, or do something like, you don't have to have the beautiful, or put a little corner in your bedroom with a desk. Like we tend to just jump so far. So I try to
Mm-hmm.
remind myself and the people I work with, it's okay to just start playing with it and start experimenting and see how it goes. And maybe it'll kind of snowball from there, or maybe you'll start that experimentation and feel like, you know what, this isn't for me. And either way, that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even with the this is kind of related, but maybe not really. But I was actually thinking about your Instagram presence in particular, how I guess in a way it also mirrors mine, how I think it was like maybe a year and a half ago now, maybe, where it was like every day both of us were online with card readings and like we're using the hashtags and we're like actively trying to grow this thing. And I think both of us lately have really, really toned it down and pulled back and just kind of trusted that it doesn't have to be, you don't have to grow your business in the same way that everybody tells you that you should. And it's been kind of interesting and surprising for me. I don't know if it's the same experience for you, how like I can not show up on Instagram and still have people coming to me for services, where I was like, if I'm not posting every single day, nobody's going to know what I do and nobody's going to want to partake in that. Have you felt something similar with your own business lately?
Yeah, I think I certainly have. One thing that I feel might factor into that, and I felt this for a while, but it's one of these things I've known for a while and I have to keep reminding myself, which is that I really believe that other people can sense the energy of what goes into what we put out.
Mm-hmm.
So, especially people like us who are very intuitive, because we pick up intuitive information through really subtle things, right? So, even for me, when I'm scrolling through Instagram and I come across a post that's like, I can feel that that person was like, I need to post and I need to use every hashtag, and oh man, I hope I get 300,000 likes on this. And it just makes me feel like I'm bowled over just for as being someone experiencing that. So I
Mm-hmm.
have to remind myself that other people can feel that and what I put out. And so I try. Sometimes I succeed more than other times, but I try to come more from a place of like, hey, I just want to share something cool. And I don't want to get too much off on a side tangent, but since we're talking about business and like hustling versus sort of allowing,
Mm-hmm.
I think there is a time and a space to hustle as a business owner. It's kind of unavoidable. But this is all coming very much through the Carrie lens. I'm not an expert on the Tao Te Ching, but there's a quote in there from Lao Tzu, and he talks about doing without doing. And so I try and come back to that idea. There are times in my business where what is most aligned for me is to be in that energy of doing and putting things out there. But how can I be doing in a way that feels without doing? It's kind
Mm-hmm.
of a weird metaphysical concept, but I try and think about that. Like, I try and think of it more, I don't know, I guess it's like kind of a witchy thing of like, almost like I'm in the magician energy. So I'm doing things and I'm being active, but it's very intentional and very concentrated. It's not like 7 of Wands where it's like, oh, I gotta do things. So I try and be intentional about how I'm doing things and what energy is going into the doing, if that makes sense.
It does. And a similar quote, which I have no idea who said it, that I think of in that regard is that a blade of grass does not struggle to grow. It just grows. And it's not like, I gotta be the tallest piece of grass and I have to be the fastest one up and I have to be the greenest and the longest lasting and charge what I'm worth.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for everything that you've shared, Carrie. I could speak all day about intuitive businesses, and I'm so glad that the underbelly of it, the fear and the shame and the second guessing and the feelings of worthiness, I'm really glad that those topics came up and through in our discussion. And I know that everyone who is watching this or listening to this, that it's definitely planting some food for thought, some seeds to consider on the next step. So thank you so much for sharing all of that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, Dana. It's been really nice to have the opportunity to talk with you, and I just appreciate you creating this space. I think that people will feel what you put into this when they interact with the recordings. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And if people want to find you online or if they want to learn more about your work, where are the best places for them to do that?
My website is carriemallon.com, and the spelling of my name will probably be somewhere.
It will be everywhere, yes.
And on Instagram, it's the same, at Carrie Mallon. And those are the two places where I spend the most time online.
And I just want to say for people, again, who are tuning into this, you should really follow Carrie on Instagram, because what I appreciate about the energy that you're putting in there, that I am at least picking up on, I noticed just a more, I'm going to say laid back, but it's not quite it's just like an honest sharing of energy without like banging people over the head with it, or like act now, act fast. It just feels like really sweet whenever I stumble across one of your posts. So thank you for the energy you're cultivating there.
Thank you. I'm glad that you're feeling that.
Awesome. Well, enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.
Okay, bye.
Bye.